The dust-covered woman stumbled toward Reed Dawson's ranch, blood streaking her torn dress, eyes wild with desperation. As his rifle found its target, she raised trembling hands and gasped words that would shatter his solitary world forever. "I will have your baby. Just don't let me die." In that moment, beneath the merciless Texas sun, a hardened rancher faced a choice that would either destroy him or forge the most unlikely love story the frontier had ever known. Welcome to a tale of survival, sacrifice, and unexpected passion in the untamed American West. This is the story of two broken souls who found wholeness in each other's scars. Stay with us until the very end and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel across this great land. The autumn wind cut across the Texas plains like a sharpened blade, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of a harsh winter. Reed Dawson stood on his weathered porch, coffee growing cold in his calloused hands as he surveyed the vast expanse of his ranch. 3 years had passed since Sarah's funeral. 3 years since he'd spoken more than a handful of words to another living soul. The silence had become his companion, as familiar and constant as the ache in his chest where his heart used to beat with purpose. At 42, Reed carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd learned that showing weakness invited wolves. His dark hair, now streaked with premature silver, caught the morning light as he squinted toward the horizon. The Lazy D Ranch stretched for miles in every direction, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land that he'd built with his own hands, and Sarah's unwavering faith. Now it felt more like a monument to everything he'd lost than a home. The cattle moved lazily across the distant pastures, their bells creating a melancholy symphony that reminded him of better days. Days when Sarah's laughter had echoed across these same fields, when her garden had bloomed with vegetables and wildflowers, when the future had stretched before them like an open road filled with promise. Those days felt like someone else's memories, now faded photographs in a book he'd closed forever. Reed drained the last of his coffee and turned toward the barn. The morning chores wouldn't complete themselves, and work had become his salvation, the only thing that could quiet the ghosts that haunted his dreams. He'd just reached for his hat when movement caught his eye, a dark speck against the golden grass about a mile out. At first he thought it might be a stray calf, maybe one that had wandered through a break in the fence. But as the figure drew closer, weaving unsteadily across the open ground, Reed realized with a start that it was human. His hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle mounted beside his door. Out here, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble, and trouble had a way of finding lonely men with valuable land. Through the dusty haze of distance, he could make out the silhouette of a woman stumbling toward his ranch house. Her movements were erratic, desperate, like those of a wounded animal seeking shelter. Reed's jaw tightened as old instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had kept him alive during his years as a cavalry scout before Sarah had convinced him to hang up his uniform and build something lasting. The woman was closer now, maybe 300 yards out, and Reed could see the torn fabric of her dress fluttering in the wind like a battle flag. Dark hair hung in matted tangles around her face, and even from this distance, he could tell she was in bad shape. His finger found the rifle's trigger guard as years of frontier wisdom whispered warnings in his ear. Apache raids weren't unheard of in these parts, and desperate people did desperate things. But something about her posture, the way she held herself, despite obvious exhaustion, made him hesitate. This wasn't the calculated approach of someone meaning harm. This was pure animal desperation, the kind that came from running for your life with nowhere left to run. 200 yards. He could see her face now, swollen and bruised, one eye nearly closed from what looked like a severe beating. Her dress, once perhaps a pale blue, was now stained with blood dirt and something that might have been tears. She moved with the jerky, uncoordinated steps of someone fighting unconsciousness with every breath. Reed raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at her, but making sure she could see it. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance like a gunshot. "State your business." The woman stopped, swaying on her feet like a tree in a strong wind. For a moment, Reed thought she might collapse right there in his front yard. Then she raised her hands, not in surrender, but in supplication, like someone praying to a merciless God. "Please," she called back, her voice cracked and barely audible. "No, shoot, She stumbled, caught herself, and took another halting step forward. "I can bear you, children. Just let me live." The words hit Reed like a physical blow. He'd heard desperate pleas before, had seen people beg for their lives in a dozen different ways during his scouting days. But there was something in her voice, a raw honesty that cut through his defenses like a knife through paper. This wasn't a trick or a trap. This was a woman at the absolute end of her rope, offering the only thing she had left to trade for her life. Reed lowered the rifle slightly, studying her more carefully. She was Apache, he could tell now, the high cheekbones, the copper skin, the way she held herself despite her obvious injuries. Apache women were known for their strength, their resilience, but this one looked like she'd been through hell and barely crawled out the other side. "Who did this to you?" he called out, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. If she'd escaped from someone they might be following, the woman's legs gave out and she dropped to her knees in the dirt. "Bad men," she gasped. "They kill my sister. I run. 3 days, no water, no food." She looked up at him with eyes that held depths of suffering he recognized all too well. "Please, mister, I work hard. I cook, I clean, I make babies. Just don't let me die like animal." Reed felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he'd thought was buried with Sarah. Compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford in this harsh land, but looking at this broken woman kneeling in his front yard, he found himself remembering his wife's voice. A man's character isn't measured by what he takes, Reed, but by what he gives when he has nothing left to spare. The rifle felt heavy in his hands as he considered his options. The smart thing would be to send her on her way, maybe give her some water and food, but make it clear she couldn't stay. Getting involved with a runaway Apache woman would bring nothing but trouble. But as he watched her swaying in the dirt, barely conscious, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he found her body on his land tomorrow morning. "Get up," he said, finally slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "Come to the house." The woman's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. She struggled to her feet, took 3 steps, and promptly collapsed face first into the dirt. Reed cursed under his breath and jogged toward her. Up close, the extent of her injuries became clear. Her left eye was swollen shut, her bottom lip split and crusted with dried blood. Bruises covered her arms and neck like a map of violence, and her dress was torn in places that suggested more than just rough travel. Someone had worked her over good and recently. "Hey," he said gruffly, rolling her onto her back. "You still with me?" Her good eye fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. "You not going to shoot? Not today." Reed slipped his arms under her knees and shoulders, lifting her with surprising gentleness. She weighed next to nothing, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where curves should have been. "Let's get you inside before you die on me. Bad for property values." The woman made a sound that might have been laughter if she'd had the strength for it. "Funny cowboy," she whispered against his chest. Reed carried her across the yard and up the porch steps, kicking open the front door with more force than necessary. The interior of the ranch house was spartanly furnished but clean, a testament to his military background and his inability to let standards slide even in isolation. He carried her through the main room, past the cold fireplace and the dust-covered furniture, into what had once been a guest bedroom. The room still smelled faintly of Sarah's lavender sachets, a scent that usually sent him fleeing to other parts of the house. But today, with this wounded stranger in his arms, it felt almost like a blessing, as if his dead wife was giving her approval from beyond the grave. Reed laid the woman carefully on the bed, noting how she winced even at his gentle touch. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her skin burning with fever. He'd seen enough injured people to know she was in bad shape, dehydration, exhaustion, and God knew what kind of internal injuries from whatever beating she'd endured. "What's your name?" he asked, moving to the washstand and pumping water into a basin. "Aiyana," she whispered, "means eternal blossom." She tried to smile but winced instead. Not much blossom left. "I'm Reed." He wrung out a cloth and returned to the bed. "Reed Dawson. This is my ranch." "Reed," she repeated, testing the name. Strong name, like tree that bends but not break. He began cleaning the blood from her face with careful practiced movements. "When's the last time you ate something?" "4 days, maybe 5. Had jerky, but—" She gestured weakly toward her torn dress. "They take everything." Reed's hands stilled for a moment. "These men who hurt you, they still following?" Aiyana's good eye filled with fear. "Maybe. They very angry when I escape. They say Apache woman bring good price in Mexico." Slavers. Reed felt his blood turn to ice. Human trafficking had become increasingly common along the border, with Apache women and children being particular targets due to their reputation for hard work and their inability to easily blend into civilized society. The thought of what this woman had endured, what her sister had died for, made his stomach churn with rage. "Well, they won't find you here," he said firmly. "This ranch has been in my family for 15 years, and no one takes anything from my land without my permission." Aiyana studied his face with her one good eye. "Why you help me, Apache woman, bring nothing but trouble for white rancher?" It was a fair question, one Reed wasn't sure he could answer honestly. Maybe it was loneliness, maybe it was the memory of his wife's voice, or maybe it was just the simple fact that he'd seen enough death to last several lifetimes. Whatever the reason, he found himself committed to keeping this broken woman alive. "Everyone deserves a chance to heal," he said, wringing out the cloth again. "Even Apache women who show up on my doorstep making desperate bargains." "You not want babies?" Aiyana asked, her voice barely a whisper. Reed's hands stilled the cloth, dripping pink water into the basin. The question brought back memories he'd buried deep, Sarah's desperate attempts to get pregnant. The miscarriages that had broken her heart a little more each time, the empty nursery they'd never spoken about, but never quite dismantled either. "We don't need to talk about that right now," he said roughly. "Right now we need to focus on keeping you alive." Aiyana nodded, but her eye remained fixed on his face. "You have sad eyes, Reed Dawson, like man who lose everything important." "Yeah, well, we all lose things." He finished cleaning her face and moved to examine the cuts on her arms. "Question is what we do after." "What you do after?" Reed was quiet for a long moment, carefully cleaning a particularly deep gash near her elbow. "I built walls," he said finally. "High ones. Figured if I couldn't lose anything else, if I didn't let anything in." "Walls keep out bad things," Aiyana observed one, "but also keep out good things. There aren't many good things left in this world." "Maybe," she said, wincing as he wrapped a bandage around her arm, "but maybe we just forget how to see them." Reed tied off the bandage and stepped back, studying his handiwork. She was still in rough shape, but at least she was clean and the bleeding had stopped. With rest, food, and time, she might actually survive this. "You need to eat something," he said. "I'll make some broth." "Reed." Her voice stopped him at the doorway. "Why you really help me?" He turned back to look at her, this battered Apache woman who'd stumbled into his life with an offer that had shaken him to his core. She was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she could see straight through the walls he'd spent 3 years building. "Because," he said slowly, 3 years ago my wife died in this very bed. Fever took her and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Maybe I'm just tired of watching people die when I might be able to help." Aiyana's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." She must have been very special woman to capture heart of strong man like you. She was, Reed said simply, and now she's gone and I'm here and you're here, and somehow we all have to figure out how to keep living. He left her, then closing the door softly behind him and walking to the kitchen with heavy steps. The irony wasn't lost on him. The first person he'd allowed into his home since Sarah's death was a complete stranger, an Apache woman who'd offered to bear his children in exchange for her life. If someone had told him this morning that he'd be nursing a wounded woman back to health by afternoon, he'd have laughed them off his property. But as he stirred beef broth over the stove, listening to the wind rattle the windows, Reed found himself thinking about walls. Aiyana was right, they did keep out the good things, along with the bad. For 3 years he'd lived in a fortress of his own making, safe from heartbreak, but also cut off from hope, from purpose, from the possibility that life might still hold something worth fighting for. The broth bubbled cheerfully on the stove, filling the kitchen with warmth and the promise of healing. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Reed wondered if they were harbingers of the trouble that might follow in Aiyana's wake. But for now, in this moment, he had someone who needed his help, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start tearing down the walls he'd built around his heart. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Reed ladled broth into a bowl, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The question was whether he was strong enough to handle whatever came next, or if opening his door to this wounded stranger would prove to be the biggest mistake of his life. As he carried the steaming bowl back toward the guest room, Reed Dawson had no way of knowing that his quiet, solitary existence was about to become anything but quiet, and that the Apache woman resting in his dead wife's bed would challenge everything he thought he knew about love loss, and the courage it took to live again. The storm was coming in more ways than one, and Reed was about to discover that some walls once breached could never be rebuilt. The first rays of dawn were painting the eastern sky pink when Reed heard movement from the guest room. He'd spent most of the night in the kitchen chair, Winchester across his knees, listening for the sound of approaching hoofbeats that never came. Sleep had eluded him anyway every time he'd closed his eyes. He'd seen Aiyana's battered face and heard her desperate words echoing in his memory. He pushed himself up from the chair joints, protesting after hours of vigilant stillness, and made his way quietly to her door. Through the thin wood, he could hear the soft sounds of someone trying to move without making noise. Reed knocked gently, waiting for her response. "Come in," came her voice, stronger than it had been the night before, but still fragile. Reed opened the door to find Aiyana sitting on the edge of the bed, attempting to stand on unsteady legs. She'd managed to wash her face with water from the pitcher, and though the bruises remained stark against her copper skin, her dark eyes held a determination that hadn't been there before. "Where do you think you're going?" Reed asked, crossing his arms. "I work," Aiyana said simply, gripping the bedpost for support. "You give food, shelter. I pay debt. You nearly died yesterday. You need rest. Rest is luxury I cannot afford." She took a tentative step forward, wavering slightly. "Bad men may be still looking. I not bring trouble to your house by being lazy." Reed studied her face, recognizing something in her expression that reminded him of his own stubborn pride. "At least eat something first. You won't be much use to anyone if you collapse again." Aiyana nodded reluctantly, allowing him to help her to the kitchen. She moved carefully, like someone whose body had betrayed her before and might do so again. Reed noticed how she favored her left side and made a mental note to check those ribs later. The kitchen felt different with another person in it. For 3 years, Reed had eaten his meals in silence, going through the motions of sustaining life without truly living it. Now, as he prepared eggs and bacon, while Aiyana sat at the small wooden table, the space seemed to breathe again. "Your wife," Aiyana said quietly, watching him work. "She cook in this kitchen." Reed's hands stilled for a moment over the skillet. Every day for 12 years, Sarah loved to cook, said it was her way of taking care of people. "She teach you." "Some had to learn the rest after." He let the sentence hang unfinished, focusing on the eggs with unnecessary concentration. Aiyana was quiet for several moments. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of understanding. "My sister, she teach me to weave. Beautiful baskets strong enough to carry water across desert. I think maybe I never weave again after they—" She stopped, drawing a shaky breath. But maybe hands remember even when heart forget how to hope. Reed set a plate before her, noting how carefully she held the fork, as if even simple movements caused pain. "What was her name?" "Your sister, Kaya, means little sister in our language, though she was older than me by 3 winters. Aiyana took a small bite of egg, chewing slowly. She had laughed like water running over stones, made everything seem possible. "How long ago?" 6 days. We were gathering piñon nuts when the slavers found us. Kaya fought hard, but—" Aiyana's voice cracked. "They killed her because she would not stop fighting. Said I was lucky they let me live. That Apache women with fight in them brought better prices in Mexico." Reed felt his jaw clench. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of human beings to mere commodities, made his blood run cold. "Did you recognize any of them?" "Leader had scar here." Aiyana traced a line down her left cheek. "White man, maybe 40 winters. Called himself Carson. Others were mixed white Mexican, maybe 1 Cherokee who had turned bad. 5 men total." Carson. Reed filed the name away. He'd heard rumors of a slaver named Carson operating out of the territories, but had never seen the man himself. They say which way they were headed. South toward border, but they might come back this way looking for me. Aiyana set down her fork, having managed only a few bites. "That is why I cannot stay long. Bring danger to good man who showed kindness." "Let me worry about danger," Reed said firmly. "You focus on getting strong enough to defend yourself." Aiyana studied his face. "You are not afraid of Pimdo men with guns." "I've faced worse odds." Reed refilled her coffee cup, noting how her hands shook slightly as she lifted it. Besides, no one tells Reed Dawson what he can or can't do on his own land. After breakfast, despite Reed's protests, Aiyana insisted on helping with the morning chores. She moved slowly but purposefully, feeding the chickens while Reed milked the cow. He watched her work from the corner of his eye, impressed by her natural way with the animals, despite her obvious pain. "You grow up on ranch?" he asked, carrying the milk pail toward the house. "No, but Apache children learn early to read. Animals understand their ways." Aiyana scattered the last of the grain for the chickens. "My father taught me that animals know true heart of person. They trust you because you have good spirit." "Animals are easier than people," Reed observed. "They don't lie, don't pretend to be something they're not. People do these things because they are afraid," Aiyana said, walking beside him. "Animals, they just are what they are. No shame in being hawk or rabbit or horse." They spent the morning working in companionable silence. Aiyana proved surprisingly capable despite her injuries, anticipating what needed to be done and doing it without being asked. When Reed went to check the fence line in the south pasture, she quietly swept the porch and started a pot of beans for lunch. It was while Reed was repairing a section of fence that he found the tracks. Boot prints fresh enough to have been made after the previous night's dew, heading directly toward his ranch house. 5 sets, just as Aiyana had described. His blood turned to ice as he realized how close the slavers had come while he'd sat in his kitchen, oblivious to the danger stalking his land. He followed the tracks back toward their origin, Winchester, in hand reading the story they told in the disturbed earth. The men had approached on foot, leaving their horses nearly a mile away. They'd circled the house twice before retreating, probably unsure if Aiyana was actually there or if Reed posed a threat they weren't prepared to handle. Reed studied the retreat pattern, noting how the tracks showed increased urgency, longer strides, deeper impressions. Something had spooked them. Maybe they'd seen his rifle. Maybe they'd simply decided to wait for a better opportunity. Either way, they knew where she was now. When he returned to the house, Aiyana was hanging laundry on the line Sarah had strung between two posts years ago. The sight stopped him cold, this Apache woman, wearing one of Sarah's old dresses, performing the same domestic tasks his wife had done in this very spot. For a moment, the past and present seemed to blur together in a way that made his chest tight. "You found their tracks," Aiyana said without turning around. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Your face changes when you are worried. Also, I found where they stood by window watching." She clipped one of his shirts to the line with steady hands. "They will come back." Reed leaned the rifle against the porch post. "When? Soon. Carson is not patient man. He thinks Apache woman is his property, and he does not like losing property." Aiyana turned to face him, her expression calm despite the fear he could see in her dark eyes. "I should go. Tonight, when moon is dark, find my people, warn them about slavers. Your people might be scattered, could take weeks to find them, and you're in no shape to survive alone in the desert. Better than bringing death to your house." Reed stepped closer, studying the determined set of her jaw. "What if I told you I don't want you to go?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Aiyana searched his face, looking for something he wasn't sure he was ready to reveal. "Why you want stranger to stay, I am nothing but trouble with Apache face." "Maybe," Reed said slowly. "I'm tired of this place being so quiet you can hear your own heart breaking." Aiyana's expression softened. "Loneliness is heavy burden. I carry it too since Kaya died. But staying here, it might cost your life. And leaving might cost yours." Reed picked up a wet sheet from the basket, shaking it out before handing her one end. "Sometimes you have to choose which risk you can live with." They worked together to hang the sheet, their movements synchronized, despite having known each other less than 24 hours. When their fingers brushed as they clipped the corners, Reed felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. "Tell me about your wife," Aiyana said quietly, as they moved to the next sheet. "What was she like?" Reed was quiet for so long that Aiyana thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of unspoken grief. "Sarah was light. Everything good about this world rolled into one person. She could make a flower grow in desert sand, could find something to laugh about even on the darkest days." He clipped a corner of the sheet with more force than necessary. "She believed in people, believed in hope, believed that love could conquer anything." "She sounds beautiful." She was, inside and out. Too good for a hard man like me, but somehow she saw something worth loving anyway. Reed's hand stilled on the fabric. "When the fever took her, she made me promise I wouldn't give up on living. Said she wanted me to find happiness again, even if it was without her." "But you did give up." "Yeah," Reed admitted. "I did. Seemed easier than trying to figure out how to live without her." Aiyana studied his profile, noting the pain etched in every line of his face. "She would be sad to see you so alone." "Probably. Sarah never could stand to see anything suffer." Reed managed a small smile. "She used to bring home every stray animal she found. Dogs, cats, even a raccoon once. Drove me crazy, but she said everything deserved a chance at love." "Maybe she sent me here," Aiyana said softly. "Maybe her spirit knows you need someone to care for." Reed's hands stilled completely. The idea that Sarah might somehow be orchestrating this from beyond the grave was both comforting and terrifying. "You really believe that?" "Apache believes spirits of loved ones watch over us, guide us to where we need to be. Maybe your Sarah's spirit brought wounded woman to your door because she knows your heart needs healing too." They finished hanging the laundry in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs, and for a few precious hours Reed could almost forget about the danger circling his ranch, like vultures waiting for death. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Aiyana broke the peaceful silence. "Reed, I need to tell you something about what those men did." The quiet intensity in her voice made him turn to look at her. She was staring out at the horizon, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She took a shaky breath. "They did not just beat me, they took other things. Things that Apache woman saves for husband, for love." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I am no longer pure, no longer suitable for Apache marriage. That is why I offered to bear your children. Damaged woman has little else to trade." Reed felt rage surge through him, hot and fierce. The violation she'd endured, the way it had been used to strip away her sense of worth, made him want to hunt down Carson and his men and show them what true violence looked like. "Aiyana," he said carefully, "what those bastards did to you doesn't make you damaged. It makes them animals. In Apache culture, we're not in Apache culture. We're here on my ranch where the only thing that matters is who you choose to be from this moment forward." Reed turned to face her fully. "Those men took your sister, they hurt your body, but they didn't touch who you are inside. That's still yours." Tears glistened in Aiyana's eyes. "How can you be so sure? Because I see you, the real you, the woman who insisted on working despite being half dead, who worries more about bringing danger to my house than about her own safety, who finds the strength to comfort a bitter old rancher even while carrying her own grief." Reed reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her clenched hands with one of his own. "That's not a damaged woman. That's the strongest person I've ever met." Aiyana stared down at their joined hands, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "I do not know how to be strong anymore. Everything I was, everything I believed about myself, they took it all. Then we'll figure out how to build something new," Reed said simply. "Both of us, because God knows I don't know how to be anything other than a grieving widower, but maybe together we can learn how to be something else." A coyote howled in the distance, its lonely cry echoing across the darkening plains. Aiyana lifted her head, listening to the wild sound with an expression Reed couldn't read. In Apache tradition, coyote is trickster spirit, sometimes brings chaos, sometimes brings change that is needed. She looked at Reed with eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom. "Maybe coyote brought me here to change both our stories. Change how? I do not know yet, but I think maybe we are supposed to heal together, help each other remember how to live again." Reed squeezed her hands gently. "I'd like that, but first we need to deal with Carson and his men. They won't give up easily." "No, they will not. Carson thinks he owns me now like horse or cow." Aiyana's voice hardened. "But I am not property. I am daughter of Running Bear, sister of Kaya, who died fighting. I will not be taken again." "Good," Reed said grimly, "because I have no intention of letting them take you." They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the ranch. Stars emerged one by one in the vast Texas sky, and Reed found himself remembering nights like this with Sarah, when the world had seemed full of infinite possibility. Tonight felt different, not like a return to those days, but like the beginning of something entirely new. When Aiyana finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Reed, when I offered to bear your children, I meant it, not because I think that is all I am good for, but because—" She struggled for the words. "Because I see good man who has forgotten how to hope, and maybe together we could create something beautiful from our broken pieces." Reed's breath caught in his throat. The honesty in her voice, the vulnerability she was showing him, despite everything she'd endured, made his chest tight with emotion he'd thought he'd buried forever. "Aiyana," he said carefully, "you don't owe me anything. Not your body, not your future, not—" "I know." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "That is why offering means something, because it is choice, not payment of debt." They looked at each other across the small space between their chairs, and Reed felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling, a door opening, a heart remembering how to beat with purpose again. He wasn't ready to examine what was happening between them, wasn't sure he ever would be, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward this wounded Apache woman who'd stumbled into his life with an offer that had shattered his carefully constructed solitude. A night bird called from somewhere in the darkness, and Aiyana smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It transformed her face, completely erasing years of pain and revealing the beautiful woman she'd been before Carson and his men had tried to break her spirit. "We should go inside," Reed said, reluctantly. "Get some sleep while we can." "Yes, tomorrow we prepare for war." As they rose from their chairs, Reed caught Aiyana's elbow when she swayed slightly. The simple touch sent warmth shooting up his arm, and he found himself reluctant to let go. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me as woman instead of broken thing, for making me remember that I am more than what was done to me." Reed studied her face in the starlight, seeing strength and grace and a kind of fierce beauty that had nothing to do with her physical appearance. "Thank you for reminding me that walls aren't the only way to protect yourself from pain." "Maybe," Aiyana said, her voice filled with quiet hope, "we can learn better way together." As they walked toward the house, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Carson and his men were coming. He could feel it in his bones like an approaching storm, but for the first time in 3 years he had something worth fighting for besides mere survival. He had someone who needed him, someone who saw past his grief to the man he might still become. The battle ahead would test them both. But tonight, in the soft darkness of a Texas evening, Reed Dawson allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were strong enough to face whatever came together. The storm that had been building on the horizon for days finally broke on the third morning after Aiyana's arrival. Reed woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the plains like cannon fire, and when he stepped onto the porch with his morning coffee, he could see dark clouds massing in the distance like an army preparing for battle. "Big storm coming," Aiyana observed, joining him with her own cup. She'd been up before dawn again, tending to the animals with a quiet efficiency that spoke of ingrained habit. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, but her movements were still careful, deliberate. "Should blow through by evening," Reed said, though something in his gut told him this storm was different. The air felt charged with more than just electricity. There was a tension that made his skin crawl, and his old cavalry instincts scream warnings. Might be a good thing. Storms make tracking harder. Aiyana nodded, but her dark eyes remained fixed on the approaching clouds. In Apache tradition, storms bring change. Sometimes good, sometimes. She shrugged. "We will see." They'd fallen into an easy routine over the past few days. Reed would handle the heavier ranch work while Aiyana managed the household tasks and lighter chores. It was a partnership born of necessity, but Reed found himself looking forward to their quiet conversations over meals, the way she hummed Apache songs, while working the sound of another person breathing in the house at night. More importantly, he'd stopped waking up expecting to find her gone. The first morning he'd crept to her door like a worried father checking on a sick child, terrified she'd slipped away in the darkness rather than bring danger to his doorstep. But she'd stayed, and with each passing day the walls around his heart crumbled a little more. "Reed," Aiyana said suddenly, her voice tight with concern. "Look." He followed her gaze to the southern pasture where his cattle were behaving strangely. Instead of their usual calm grazing, they were bunched together, heads raised, all facing the same direction. It was the kind of behavior that meant predators or something worse. Reed set down his coffee and reached for his rifle. "Stay here." "No." Aiyana's hand closed around his arm. "If trouble comes, we face together. I will not hide behind your strength like child." There was steel in her voice that brooked no argument. Reed studied her face, seeing the determined set of her jaw, the way her chin lifted in challenge. This wasn't the broken woman who'd collapsed in his yard 3 days ago. This was someone who'd found her fighting spirit again. "All right," he said finally. But you do exactly what I say when I say it. Understood, understood. They moved carefully across the yard, using the barn for cover as they approached the agitated cattle. Reed's eyes swept the landscape, looking for anything out of place. A glint of metal movement where there should be none, the kind of disturbance that meant human presence. He found it in the form of fresh horse tracks near the water trough. 5 sets just like before, but these were different, deeper, more recent. The riders had been here within the last hour, probably watching the house while he and Aiyana had their morning coffee. They're getting bolder, Reed muttered, kneeling to examine the tracks more closely, coming closer each time. Testing defenses, Aiyana agreed. Carson likes to know enemy before he strikes. He will watch until he thinks he understands your weaknesses. What does he see when he looks at this place? Aiyana was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the ranch with the tactical awareness of someone who'd grown up in a culture where survival meant constant vigilance. He sees one man alone, except for Apache woman he thinks is his property. He sees big house, valuable land, no neighbors close enough to help. She paused. He sees easy target. Reed felt his jaw clench. Then he's in for a surprise. They spent the morning reinforcing their defenses as best they could. Reed boarded up the lower windows and moved ammunition to strategic locations throughout the house. Aiyana proved surprisingly knowledgeable about defensive tactics, suggesting improvements that spoke of hard-won experience. My father fought cavalry for many years before making peace, she explained when Reed commented on her expertise. He taught all his children how to turn any place into fortress, how to make enemy pay dearly for every step. Smart man. Smart enough to know when fighting was hopeless, when survival meant adaptation instead of war. Aiyana handed him another board to nail over a window, but also smart enough to know some things are worth dying for. The irony wasn't lost on Reed, preparing for battle alongside an Apache woman in the same house where he'd once planned a peaceful future with his wife. Sarah would have hated the violence that was coming, would have tried to find some diplomatic solution that preserved everyone's dignity. But Sarah was gone, and the world had proven itself to be a harsher place than her gentle heart had ever imagined. By midday, the storm clouds had moved closer, and the first fat raindrops were spattering against the dusty ground. Reed was checking the locks on the barn when he heard Aiyana call his name from the house, her voice sharp with alarm. He ran toward the porch, rifle in hand, and found her standing at the kitchen window with her face pressed against the glass. "Riders," she said simply, "coming from the south." Reed joined her at the window, counting silhouettes against the stormy sky. 5 men on horseback, moving at an unhurried pace that spoke of confidence. They weren't trying to hide their approach. This was meant to be a show of force. "That's them," Aiyana whispered, and Reed could hear the fear she was trying to hide. "Carson is the one in front, with the black hat." Reed studied the lead rider, taking in the man's posture, the way he sat his horse, the casual arrogance in his bearing. Carson looked to be in his 40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of hard face that came from years of doing unpleasant work for money. The scar Aiyana had described was clearly visible, even at this distance, a pale line running from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. "Remember what we talked about," Reed said quietly, checking his rifle one more time. "Stay low, keep to cover, and don't try to be a hero." "Same to you," Aiyana replied, and when Reed looked at her in surprise, he saw she was holding one of his spare pistols with comfortable familiarity. "My father also taught me to shoot." The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the house, close enough to talk, but far enough to avoid immediate gunfire. Carson dismounted and walked forward, his hands conspicuously away from his weapons, in a mockery of peaceful intent. "Hello, the house," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Name's Carson. I'm looking for some lost property that might have wandered this way." Reed stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle at ready but not quite pointing it at the intruder. "This is private land, mister. You're not welcome here." Carson smiled, and it was the kind of expression that made Reed's skin crawl. Now that's not very neighborly. I'm just looking for a runaway Apache squaw. Word is she might have taken shelter hereabouts. Haven't seen any Apache women, Reed replied evenly. Might want to try the reservation about 40 miles east. Funny thing about that, Carson said, taking another step closer. My boys and I found tracks leading right to your door, fresh tracks. Now I'm a reasonable man, so I'm willing to pay fair compensation for any inconvenience you might have suffered. Reed felt his grip tighten on the rifle. I told you I haven't seen any Apache women. You're welcome to search the area, but you'll do it from the other side of my property line. Carson's smile widened, showing teeth that were yellow and predatory. See, that's where we have a problem. That particular squaw is valuable property, and her current location is a matter of considerable interest to me and my associates. Your associates can go to hell, Reed said flatly, and so can you. The change in Carson's demeanor was immediate and chilling. The false friendliness disappeared, replaced by the cold efficiency of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted through violence. That's unfortunate, Carson said, his hand drifting toward his gun, because I really hoped we could settle this like civilized men. There's nothing civilized about slavery, Reed replied, and there's nothing civilized about you. Carson laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Slavery, hell friend, this is just business, supply and demand. There's a strong market for Apache women south of the border, and I'm simply facilitating commerce by murdering innocent people and kidnapping their sisters. Casualties of trade, Carson said with a shrug. The squaw's sister shouldn't have fought so hard, made things messy when they could have been clean. Reed felt rage surge through him, hot and pure. The casual way Carson spoke about Kaya's murder, as if she'd been nothing more than damaged merchandise, made him want to put a bullet between the man's eyes right then and there. You're going to want to leave now, Reed said, his voice deadly quiet. Before I do something we'll both regret. Oh, I don't think so. Carson gestured to his men, who began spreading out in a semicircle around the house. See, my reputation is at stake here. Word gets out that some dirt farmer ran me off. It'll be bad for business. Can't have that. Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain began in earnest, turning the dust to mud and adding an ominous backdrop to the confrontation. Reed could feel Aiyana's presence behind him in the doorway, could sense her tension like a coiled spring. Last chance, Reed said. Ride away now, and we'll forget this conversation ever happened. Carson drew his gun with practiced ease, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Counteroffer. You hand over my property and I'll let you keep breathing. Might even throw in a few dollars for your trouble. Go to hell. Stubborn, Carson observed. I respect that, but it's going to make this harder than it needs to be. He raised his voice so his men could hear. Boys, seems like our friend here needs some convincing. Why don't you show him what happens to people who interfere with our business? The men began moving closer, and Reed knew the talking was over. He raised his rifle sighting on Carson's chest, finger tightening on the trigger. Reed, Aiyana's voice came from behind him, steady despite the circumstances. Maybe there is another way. No, Reed said without taking his eyes off Carson. There's not. Wait. Aiyana stepped onto the porch beside him, and Reed's heart nearly stopped. She was making herself a target, giving Carson exactly what he'd come for. Well, Carson said, his gun swinging toward Aiyana. There's my runaway property. Knew she was here. I am not your property, Aiyana said clearly. I am free woman protected by this man's honor and my own strength. Carson laughed. Honor, sweetheart, honor doesn't stop bullets. And your strength, he gestured dismissively. You ran like a rabbit when things got tough. That's not strength. I ran because my sister was dead, and staying would have meant dying for nothing. Aiyana replied. That is not cowardice. That is survival. Call it whatever makes you feel better. Point is, you belong to me now, and I've come to collect. Reed stepped slightly in front of Aiyana, his rifle never wavering from Carson's center mass. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged," Carson said coldly. "But think about this, friend. You die here today, and she comes with us anyway. All your heroics accomplish is getting yourself killed for nothing." "Maybe," Reed said, "but at least I'll take you with me." Carson's eyes narrowed as he studied Reed's stance, the steady way he held his weapon, the complete absence of fear in his face. "You know how to use that rifle, don't you, military man?" "Cavalry. 15 years. Explains the attitude." Carson spat into the mud. "Well, soldier boy, let me explain how this is going to work. My boys are going to circle around back while we're talking. By now, they've got this house surrounded. You might get me, might even get one or two others, but you can't get us all. And when you're dead, we take the squaw anyway." Reed felt Aiyana's hand touch his shoulder, a gesture of support that gave him strength. "Then I guess we'll see how many of you bastards I can send to hell before I go down. You'd really die for an Apache woman you've known for 3 days." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Reed thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to her to find happiness again. He thought about Aiyana's courage, her determination to rebuild herself from the broken pieces of her life. He thought about the way she'd made his empty house feel like a home again. "Yeah," Reed said simply, "I would." Carson shook his head in disgust. "Then you're a fool, but if that's how you want to play it." He raised his gun, pointing it directly at Reed's chest. "Boys, take them both down." The first gunshot came from behind the house, followed immediately by a scream that was cut short by another shot. Reed threw himself sideways, tackling Aiyana and carrying both of them behind the porch railing as Carson's bullet splintered the wood where Reed's head had been a moment before. "Stay down!" Reed shouted, rolling to bring his rifle to bear on Carson, who was already diving for cover behind a water trough. More shots erupted from multiple directions as Carson's men opened fire on the house. Windows exploded inward, showering glass across the floor. Wood splintered and sparked as bullets chewed through the walls. Reed fired at a muzzle flash near the barn, rewarded by a cry of pain and the sound of someone falling. Beside him, Aiyana had found cover behind an overturned table and was returning fire with the pistol, her shots careful and well-aimed. "How many?" Reed called to her during a brief lull in the gunfire. "I count 3 still shooting," Aiyana replied, ejecting spent shells and reloading with practiced efficiency. "Maybe 4, hard to tell in this rain." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the battlefield in stark black and white. Reed could see Carson crouched behind the trough, reloading his weapon with quick, efficient movements. One of his men was down near the barn, clutching his shoulder and cursing. Another was firing from behind the chicken coop, his shots wild, but keeping Reed and Aiyana pinned down. "We can't stay here," Reed muttered, studying their situation. The house offered some protection, but not enough. Carson's men were gradually working their way closer, and it was only a matter of time before they found an angle that would end the fight. "The storm cellar," Aiyana said suddenly. "Can we reach it?" Reed looked toward the cellar door 20 yards away, across open ground. It might as well have been 20 miles. Not without getting shot to pieces. What if we create distraction? Before Reed could ask what she meant, Aiyana was moving. She sprinted toward the kitchen, keeping low as bullets whined overhead. Reed cursed and laid down, covering fire, trying to keep Carson's men busy while she disappeared into the house. Seconds later, smoke began pouring from the kitchen windows. Aiyana had set something on fire, and the wind was carrying the smoke toward Carson's position. It wasn't much of a distraction, but it might be enough. Reed heard footsteps on the porch and spun to find Aiyana crouched beside him, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes bright with determination. "Kitchen curtains," she explained. "Bought us maybe 2 minutes before they figure out it is just smoke. 2 minutes isn't much. It is enough." Aiyana gripped his arm. "Reed, listen to me. They expect us to hide, to wait for them to come to us. But Apache way is to strike when enemy thinks he has advantage. What are you suggesting? We go to them, use storm, use confusion, hit them before they know what is happening. Reed stared at her through the smoke and rain, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him of the Apache warriors he'd fought alongside during his cavalry days. It was a desperate plan, probably suicidal, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. All right, he said, but we do this together. No heroics, no trying to save me by sacrificing yourself. Same to you, Aiyana replied with a fierce smile. We live together or die together. Lightning crashed again, closer this time, and in its brief illumination Reed saw something that made his blood run cold. Carson had worked his way around to the side of the house and was now only yards away, using the storm for cover, just as Reed and Aiyana planned to do. Move! Reed shouted, pushing Aiyana toward the cellar. As Carson's gun erupted in flame, the bullet took Reed high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the porch railing. Pain exploded through his body, but training and adrenaline kept him moving. He brought his rifle up one-handed and put a shot into Carson's center mass, watching the slaver stumble backward with a look of surprise on his scarred face. Aiyana was at Reed's side, instantly hauling him toward the cellar, as Carson's remaining men converged on their position. Her strength surprised him. She was small, but she managed to half-carry him across the muddy ground while bullets snapped through the air around them. They tumbled down the cellar steps just as another volley tore through the space they'd occupied. Reed's shoulder felt like it was on fire, and he could feel blood soaking through his shirt. How bad? Aiyana asked, examining his wound by the light of lightning flashes. I'll live, Reed said through gritted teeth. Carson, hit bad, but still moving. He is angry now, not just greedy. As if summoned by her words, Carson's voice echoed through the storm. Come out wherever you are. This ends now, one way or another. Reed tried to stand and nearly fell as his injured shoulder refused to support his weight. Aiyana caught him, her face grim with determination. You cannot fight anymore, she said. Not with that shoulder. Watch me. Reed. Her voice was gentle but firm. You saved my life. You gave me hope again. You showed me what it means to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. She touched his face softly. Now let me save yours. Before he could stop her, Aiyana was climbing back up the cellar steps, the pistol steady in her hands. Reed struggled after her, his vision blurring from pain and blood loss, but he couldn't let her face Carson alone. He emerged from the cellar to find Aiyana standing in the center of the yard, rain streaming down her face, the gun at her side. Carson was perhaps 20 feet away, his own weapon trained on her heart. Smart girl, Carson said, though his voice was strained with pain. Knew you'd see reason eventually. I do see reason, Aiyana replied calmly. I see that you are dying man who thinks he can take me with him. Carson laughed, but it turned into a cough that brought up blood. Maybe so, but I'll live long enough to finish what I started. No, Reed said, staggering up behind Aiyana. You won't. Carson's eyes flicked between them, calculating odds. His remaining men were moving in from the sides, but they were hesitant now, uncertain. Their leader was wounded, the easy target had turned into a war zone, and the storm was making everything chaotic. Last chance, Carson said, raising his gun toward Aiyana. Come with me now, and the cowboy lives. Refuse and you both die. Aiyana looked back at Reed, her eyes full of love and sorrow and determination. I told you once that we heal together or not at all, that we face whatever comes as partners. Aiyana, I choose to face it, she said firmly, turning back to Carson. Come and take me if you can. Carson's face twisted with rage, and Reed knew the talking was over. Time seemed to slow as the slaver's finger tightened on the trigger, as Aiyana raised her own weapon with fluid grace as Reed fought against his wounded body to bring his rifle to bear. The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury, lightning and thunder crashing together in a display of nature's raw power that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. In that blinding flash of lightning, 3 guns spoke at once. Carson's shot went wide as thunder shook his aim, the bullet whistling past Aiyana's ear, close enough to burn. Her pistol barked twice in rapid succession, both rounds finding their mark in Carson's chest. Reed's rifle roared a heartbeat later, the bullet taking the slaver high in the shoulder and spinning him like a child's top. Carson dropped to his knees in the mud, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. Blood frothed from his lips as he tried to speak, but the only sound that emerged was a wet gurgle. He pitched forward face first into the rain-soaked earth and lay still. "Carson!" one of his men shouted from behind the barn. "Carson, you all right?" Reed and Aiyana crouched behind the water trough, breathing hard. Reed's shoulder was a symphony of agony, but adrenaline kept him moving. 2 of Carson's men were still out there, maybe 3, and they'd be desperate now that their leader was down. "We have to end this," Reed said through gritted teeth, "before they regroup." "Or before more come," Aiyana agreed. "Carson, he was careful, man, probably told others where he was going." The thought sent ice through Reed's veins. If Carson had backup coming, they needed to finish this fight quickly and get ready for round 2. But first, they had to deal with the remaining slavers. A shot rang out from near the chicken coop, the bullet spanging off the metal trough inches from Reed's head. He returned fire, rewarded by a yelp of surprise, but no cry of pain. "Miss, I'm going around back," Aiyana whispered. "Draw their attention, get them focused on you." "Like hell you are." "Reed, listen to me." Her voice was urgent but calm. "You are hurt, bleeding. You cannot move fast enough, but I can. Apache women learn to move like shadows when necessary." Before he could protest, she was gone, slipping away into the storm with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned stealth from childhood. Reed cursed under his breath and tried to ignore the growing weakness in his limbs. Blood loss was starting to take its toll, and he needed to end this fight before his body gave out entirely. Another muzzle flash from behind the barn, and Reed sent 2 quick shots in response. This time he heard a scream of pain, and the sound of someone falling. 1 down, at least 1 more to go. "Jimmy, Jimmy, you hit," a voice called from somewhere near the house. "Can't feel my leg," came the weak reply. "Think it's broke." "Hang on, I'm coming." Reed smiled grimly despite his pain. Classic mistake, letting emotion override tactics. The remaining gunman was about to expose himself trying to help his wounded partner. Sure enough, a figure emerged from behind the chicken coop, running toward the barn in a crouch. Reed led him just enough and squeezed the trigger. The man stumbled, caught himself, kept running. Wounded but not down. That's when Aiyana struck. She seemed to materialize out of the storm itself, rising from behind a pile of hay bales like an avenging spirit. Her pistol spoke once, twice, and the running man pitched forward into the mud and didn't get up. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the sound of rain on wood and the distant rumble of thunder. Reed kept his rifle trained on the barn where the wounded man called Jimmy was hiding, waiting for any sign of movement. "Jimmy," Reed called out, "your friends are dead. Carson's dead. You can ride out of here and forget this ever happened, or you can join them. Your choice." A long pause, then, "You broke my leg, you bastard." "Could have broken your neck. I'm being generous." Another pause, longer this time. Reed could almost hear the man thinking, weighing his options. Finally, "I can't ride with this leg." "Then you can crawl, but you're leaving one way or another." Aiyana appeared at Reed's side like a ghost, her face streaked with mud and rain, but her eyes bright with fierce satisfaction. "Last one is behind the big water barrel by the barn door, wounded in the leg, bleeding but not dying. Think he'll surrender. Think he's too scared to do anything else." Reed struggled to his feet, his vision swimming for a moment before stabilizing. "Jimmy, I'm coming to talk." Don't try anything stupid." They approached the barn carefully, weapons ready. Jimmy turned out to be a kid, maybe 19 or 20, with a baby face that made him look even younger. He was propped against the water barrel, clutching his shattered leg and crying openly. "Please don't kill me," he sobbed when he saw them. "I just needed the money. I ain't like Carson and the others." Reed studied the kid's face, seeing genuine terror mixed with pain. "How long you been riding with Carson?" 3 weeks. This was supposed to be my first job." Jimmy wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "He said it would be easy money, just picking up runaway property." "Property?" Aiyana repeated, her voice flat with disgust. "I didn't know." Jimmy's voice cracked. "I thought it was just business like he said. I didn't know about the killing, about what they did to that other woman." Reed felt some of his anger ebb. The kid was stupid and greedy, but he wasn't evil, not yet anyway. "What's your real name?" "James Sullivan." "Jimmy, I got a mother in San Antonio, a little sister. They need the money I send home." "Well, Jimmy Sullivan," Reed said, "you're going to have to find another line of work, because if I ever see you within 100 miles of this ranch, I'll put a bullet between your eyes." "Understood." Jimmy nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. I understand. I won't come back, I swear." "Good." Reed turned to Aiyana. "Help me get him on a horse. His wounded leg will slow him down, but he should make it to town if he doesn't do anything stupid." They managed to boost Jimmy onto Carson's horse, the kid whimpering with pain but not protesting. His leg was definitely broken, but it was a clean break that would heal if he got medical attention. "There's a doctor in Millerville," Reed told him, 20 miles northeast. "Tell him Reed Dawson sent you and he'll patch you up." "Why?" Jimmy asked, confused. "Why are you helping me?" Reed looked up at the kid, seeing something of his younger self in that frightened face. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Don't waste yours." They watched Jimmy ride away into the storm, slumped over his saddle but staying upright. Reed hoped the kid would learn from this, would find an honest way to help his family, but that was out of his hands now. "Think he'll keep his word?" Aiyana asked. "Probably. He's more scared than mean." Reed looked around at the bodies scattered across his yard, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Help me check the others, make sure they're really dead." Carson was definitely gone, his face already taking on the waxy pallor of death. The man by the barn had taken Aiyana's shots through the heart and never knew what hit him. The third man was wounded but breathing, clutching a shattered shoulder and moaning softly. "This one's alive," Aiyana called out. Reed limped over, recognizing the man as the one who'd been firing from behind the chicken coop. He was conscious but in obvious agony, blood seeping between his fingers where he held his shoulder. "What's your name?" Reed asked. "Go to hell," the man spat. "Fair enough." Reed stood up, wincing as the movement sent fresh waves of pain through his own wounded shoulder. "Jimmy mentioned other people might know where Carson was going. That true?" The wounded man just glared at him. "Look," Reed said patiently, "I'm not going to torture you for information. But if more of Carson's people show up here looking for revenge, I need to know about it." Still nothing. Aiyana knelt beside the wounded slaver, her face calm but her voice carrying an undertone of menace that made Reed's skin crawl. "You helped kill my sister. You helped Carson take women and children to sell like cattle. Now you lie bleeding in mud and only mercy of good man keeps you breathing." The slaver's eyes widened as he recognized her. "You remember me now," Aiyana continued. "You remember holding me down while Carson decided what to do with me. You remember laughing when I begged you not to hurt Kaya." "Please," the man whispered. "I was just following orders." "So was I," Aiyana said, drawing her knife. "My father's orders. He always told me that some debts can only be paid in blood." "Aiyana," Reed said quietly. "He's wounded, defenseless." "So was my sister." Reed saw something dangerous in her eyes, a darkness that spoke of barely controlled rage. He understood it. God knew he wanted to see these bastards suffer for what they'd done, but he also knew that crossing certain lines changed you forever. "Look at me," he said firmly. "Aiyana, look at me." She turned her knife still poised over the terrified slaver. "This isn't who you are," Reed said gently. "You're not Carson. You're not like them." For a moment he thought she might ignore him, might let her anger drive her to do something she'd regret forever. Then something shifted in her expression and she slowly lowered the knife. "You are right," she said, her voice hollow, "but he still deserves to know what it feels like to be helpless." She leaned close to the wounded man, speaking so quietly that Reed could barely hear her words. "Carson is dead. Your friends are dead. You live only because good man showed mercy your kind never learned. If you ever come near Apache people again, if you ever hurt another woman or child, I will find you, and next time there will be no mercy." The slaver nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Now," Aiyana continued in a normal voice, "tell us about Carson's other men." There are 3 more back at camp," the man stammered, "but they don't know where we went. Carson didn't trust anyone with that information." "Where's the camp?" 2 days' ride south near Devil's Canyon. They'll wait maybe a week before giving up and moving on." Reed felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. A week would give them time to heal, to prepare for whatever came next. "Anyone else? Any other gangs Carson worked with?" "No, sir. He kept things small, didn't like partners." The man winced as he tried to shift position. "Look, I know I got no right to ask, but could you maybe not leave me here to die? I got people who depend on me too." Reed studied the man's face, seeing genuine fear and what might have been remorse. "You got a horse?" "Yeah, tied up in the trees about a mile south." "Can you ride with that shoulder?" "I think so." Reed made a decision that probably said more about his character than he was comfortable admitting. "Get out of here, find a doctor, find a new line of work, and hope I never see you again." The slaver's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. Reed helped the man to his feet, noting how he swayed with pain and blood loss. "You change your mind about hurting innocent people?" "Yes, sir, I swear." "Good, because if you don't, Aiyana here will keep her promise about finding you." They watched the wounded man stumble away into the storm, clutching his shattered shoulder, but moving with determined purpose. Reed hoped he'd learned something from this encounter, but experience had taught him that some people never changed, no matter how close they came to death. "You think I am weak," Aiyana said suddenly, "for not killing him." "No," Reed replied, turning to look at her. "I think you're strong. Takes more strength to show mercy than to give in to anger. My father would say he deserved to die for what he helped do to Kaya. Maybe he did, but you're not your father, and this isn't the same world he fought in." Reed reached out to touch her face gently. "You could have become like them, could have let what they did to you turn you into something hard and cruel. Instead, you chose to stay human." Aiyana leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "I want them all to suffer for what they took from me." "I know, but suffering them won't bring Kaya back, and it won't heal the parts of you they tried to break." "Then what will—" Reed looked around at his ranch, at the bodies they'd need to bury, at the damage that would need to be repaired. Then he looked back at Aiyana, seeing strength and grace and a kind of fierce beauty that had nothing to do with her physical appearance. "Time," he said finally, "and maybe learning to build something good from the pieces they left behind." The storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing more distant, and the rain gentling from a torrent to a steady patter. Reed's shoulder was throbbing with increasing intensity, and he could feel his strength ebbing like water from a cracked bucket. "We need to get you inside," Aiyana said, noticing his pale complexion. "That shoulder needs proper attention." "Bodies first," Reed insisted. "Can't leave them lying around. Bad for the water supply." "Reed, I'm fine." "You are not fine. You are a stubborn, bleeding man who needs medical care." Aiyana slipped her arm around his waist, supporting his weight. Bodies can wait until morning. You cannot. Reed wanted to protest, but a wave of dizziness swept over him, and he found himself leaning heavily on Aiyana's slight frame. She was stronger than she looked, supporting his weight without complaint as they made their way toward the house. The interior had been shot to pieces. Windows were broken, furniture overturned, and the walls were peppered with bullet holes. It looked like a war zone, which Reed supposed it had been. "Kitchen's probably the safest room," Reed said, noting that most of the damage was confined to the front of the house. Carson's men focused their fire on the main room and porch. Aiyana helped him into a kitchen chair and began examining his shoulder with gentle but thorough hands. "Bullet went clean through," she announced. "That is good news. Bad news is you lost lot of blood." "I'll live." "Yes, you will," she said firmly, "because I am not losing another person I care about." The simple statement hit Reed like a physical blow. In the chaos of the fight, he'd pushed aside the growing feelings between them, the connection that had been building since the moment she'd stumbled into his life. But now, sitting in his shot-up kitchen while she tended his wounds with careful hands, he couldn't ignore it anymore. "Aiyana," he said softly, "hush, let me work." She cleaned the wound with whiskey that burned like liquid fire, then bound it with strips torn from one of Sarah's old dresses. Her touch was gentle but sure, and Reed found himself watching her face as she worked. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. "Apache women must know many things. How to heal, how to fight, how to survive when world tries to break you." She tied off the bandage and stepped back to examine her work. "My grandmother was medicine woman. She taught me about plants, about wounds, about how body heals itself if given chance." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She also said that sometimes Great Spirit sends us exactly what we need, even when we do not think we want it." Aiyana met his eyes. Maybe Great Spirit knew we both needed healing that could only come from helping each other. Reed reached out with his good arm, taking her hand in his. 3 days ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting here having this conversation with an Apache woman who'd offered to bear my children, I'd have laughed them off my property. And now I think your grandmother might have been right about the Great Spirit knowing what we need. Aiyana's eyes softened. "Reed, I need you to understand something. What I offered that first day when I was desperate and broken, it was real offer from real feelings, but it was also offer from woman who thought she had nothing else to give." Reed waited, sensing there was more. "Now I know better," she continued. "Now I know that I have more to offer than just my body, just my ability to bear children. I have strength, I have knowledge, I have heart that still knows how to love despite everything that has been taken from me." "What are you saying?" Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. "I am saying that if I stay here, if we build life together, it must be as equals, as partners who choose each other, not as woman who trades herself for protection." Reed felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Is that what you want to stay?" "I want to build something good from the ashes of what we both lost. I want to learn how to live again instead of just surviving." She looked up at him. "But only if you want same thing." Reed thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to her to find happiness again. He thought about the empty years since her death, about the walls he'd built to protect himself from feeling anything. Then he thought about the past 3 days, about how Aiyana had brought light back into his dark world without even trying. "Sarah used to say that love wasn't about finding someone to complete you," he said slowly. "It was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours to make something new and beautiful. Your Sarah was wise woman. She was, and I think she'd approve of you." Reed lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to Aiyana's knuckles. "I'd like very much to build something good with you, not because you owe me anything, not because I saved your life, but because—" He struggled for the words. because you make me remember what it feels like to have hope." Aiyana smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of the year. "Then we will build it together, strong enough to weather any storm." Outside, the last of the thunder rumbled away into the distance, and the rain gentled to a soft whisper against the broken windows. Reed knew there would be challenges ahead, bodies to bury damage, to repair the possibility of more trouble from Carson's associates. But for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't facing the future alone. Aiyana squeezed his hand, and Reed squeezed back, sealing a promise that went deeper than words. They'd both been broken by loss and violence, but together they might find a way to heal. Together they might build something worth fighting for from the ruins of their separate griefs. The storm had passed, and in its wake something new was beginning. Dawn broke clear and golden over the Lazy D Ranch, painting the sky in shades of hope that Reed hadn't seen in years. The storm had washed the air clean, leaving everything sharp and bright and somehow new. Reed stood on his damaged porch, his arm in a sling but his spirit lighter than it had been since Sarah's death, watching Aiyana tend to the chickens with the same gentle efficiency she brought to everything. The bodies were gone, buried in a grove of cottonwoods at the far edge of the property, where they wouldn't contaminate the water supply. It had taken them 2 days to manage the grim task, working slowly because of Reed's injured shoulder, but they'd done it together. Even Carson, despite everything he'd done, deserved a proper burial. Aiyana had spoken a few words in Apache over the graves, something about spirits finding peace and debts being settled. "The fence in the south pasture needs attention." Aiyana called out, scattering grain for the grateful hens. "I can start on it this afternoon if you want." Reed shook his head, still marveling at how naturally she'd taken to ranch life. "Doc Morrison said I should be able to use this arm again in a week or 2. The fence can wait." "Reed Dawson, you are most stubborn man I have ever met," Aiyana said, walking toward him with that fluid grace that never failed to catch his attention. "I am not made of glass. I can handle fence wire." "I know you can handle anything you set your mind to," Reed replied, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair from her face. "But I like working alongside you. Makes the chores feel less like work." The simple gesture sent warmth spiraling through both of them. Over the past week, they'd been dancing around the growing attraction between them, sharing meaningful glances and careful touches, but neither quite ready to take the next step. Too much had happened too quickly, and they both needed time to process the violence they'd survived and the future they were building. "Tonight is full moon," Aiyana observed, settling beside him on the porch steps. "Good time for new beginnings, according to Apache tradition." "Is that so?" "Mm-hmm. Also good time for making important decisions." She studied his profile. "Have you made any important decisions lately?" Reed turned to look at her, seeing mischief dancing in her dark eyes, along with something deeper and more serious. "A few, like deciding that having you here makes this place feel like home again instead of just a house I happen to live in." "That is good decision. Any others?" "Well," Reed said slowly, "I've been thinking that maybe it's time to stop being afraid of happiness. Stop thinking that loving someone new means betraying Sarah's memory." Aiyana nodded encouragingly. "Sarah sounds like woman who would want you to be happy." "She was. And she'd like you, I think. You're both strong women who see the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves." Reed took Aiyana's hand, intertwining their fingers. "I've also been thinking that this ranch is too big for one person, could use a partner." "What kind of partner?" "The permanent kind. The kind who shares everything, work, dreams, bed life." Reed's voice was steady despite the way his heart was hammering against his ribs. "The kind who might be interested in bearing children with a stubborn rancher who's still learning how to live again." Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, and Reed felt anxiety creep up his spine. Maybe he'd misread the signals. Maybe she wasn't ready for this kind of commitment. Maybe I accept, she said simply. Reed blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Aiyana turned to face him fully. Reed, I have been thinking too, about what it means to choose your own path instead of having it chosen for you, about what it means to build something good from broken pieces. She stood up, pulling him to his feet beside her. I choose you. I choose this ranch, this life, this future we can make together. Not because I owe you anything, not because I am desperate or grateful, but because you are a good man who makes me want to be best version of myself. Reed felt something that had been frozen in his chest for 3 years finally begin to thaw. Are you sure this won't be easy? Ranch life is hard, and there's always the possibility that more trouble will come looking for us. I am an Apache woman who survived slavers, helped kill 5 armed men, and learned to love again after losing everything. Aiyana smiled. I think I can handle ranch life and whatever trouble comes with it. Reed laughed, surprised by the sound of his own joy. When you put it like that. Besides, Aiyana continued, stepping closer until they were almost touching. Trouble finds us anyway. Better to face it together than alone. Reed cupped her face in his good hand, marveling at the trust he saw in her eyes. Aiyana, I want you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a replacement for Sarah. I see something completely new and wonderful. And when I look at you, I do not see man who saved me from death, she replied. I see man I want to build life with, who sees me as whole person worth loving. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Reed rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing a little unsteadily. So, he said, when should we make this official? Well, there is Apache ceremony, but we would need tribal elder for that. And I suppose there is white man's ceremony with preacher and church. Reed considered this. What if we did both honor both our traditions? Aiyana's face lit up. You would do that. Aiyana, you're going to be my wife. That means your traditions become my traditions, your people become my people. Reed's voice was serious. I want to do this right. There is one problem, Aiyana said, her expression suddenly uncertain. My people, they may not accept white husband, and your people may not accept Apache wife. Reed had been thinking about this too. Then we'll build our own tradition, take the best parts of both cultures, and make something that's uniquely ours. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, but it'll be worth it. Reed gestured toward the ranch spread out before them. Look at this place. 5,000 acres of good land, plenty of water, room to grow. We could build something lasting here, something that honors both our backgrounds. Aiyana followed his gaze, seeing not just the immediate landscape, but the potential it represented. Children could run free here, learn both Apache and white ways, learn to be strong in any world they enter. Children, Reed repeated the word, carrying weight and hope. You still want that, even after everything, especially after everything. Aiyana's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. Carson and his men, they tried to break my spirit, tried to convince me I was only good for one thing, but carrying children of man, I love raising them with wisdom from both our peoples. That would be victory they could never take away. Reed felt his throat tighten with emotion. How many children? As many as Great Spirit blesses us with, but at least 3, one for each of us to carry forward our healing, and one to represent new beginning we make together. 3 sounds perfect. They spent the rest of the morning planning their future with the enthusiasm of people who'd thought they'd lost the right to dream. They would expand the vegetable garden to include traditional Apache plants that Aiyana remembered from her childhood. They would build a proper barn to replace the one damaged in the gunfight. They would buy more cattle, maybe some horses, create something that could be passed down to their children and their children's children. We should probably tell someone about Carson and his men, Reed said eventually. Sheriff Hawkins in Millerville ought to know there were slavers operating in the territory. Good idea. Also, we should send word to my people, let them know about slaver camp near Devil's Canyon. 3 men are still there, and they might try to continue Carson's work. Reed nodded grimly. We'll ride to town tomorrow, take care of both things. Make sure everyone knows to be on the lookout for trouble. Reed, Aiyana said suddenly. What about the young one, Jimmy? Do you think he really learned his lesson? I hope so, but if he didn't, Reed shrugged. We'll deal with it when the time comes. Can't save everyone from their own bad choices. That afternoon, they worked together repairing the damage from the gunfight. Reed's wounded shoulder limited what he could do, but he directed while Aiyana handled the physical labor with remarkable skill. She'd found Sarah's tool collection and taken to carpentry like she'd been born to it. Your wife, she was handy woman, Aiyana observed, replacing a shattered window pane with glass they'd salvaged from the storm cellar. Had to be. Ranch life doesn't leave much room for helplessness. Reed held the frame steady while she worked. She could fix anything, furniture, harness, even helped me rebuild the barn roof after a tornado took it off. She sounds like she would understand why I want to learn these things too. She'd probably insist on teaching you herself if she were here. Reed's voice was soft with memory. Sarah believed that knowledge was the only thing no one could take away from you. Aiyana secured the last piece of glass and stepped back to admire her work. Smart woman. I think I would have liked her very much. She would have loved you, Reed said with certainty. Would have appreciated your strength, your determination to rebuild yourself into something even stronger than before. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they sat on the repaired porch, sharing a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. The ranch was peaceful around them, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the evening wind carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Reed, Aiyana said suddenly, I need to tell you something about Apache marriage customs. All right. When Apache woman chooses husband, she shows her commitment by preparing special meal using traditional recipes and ingredients. Aiyana looked embarrassed. Problem is, I do not have proper ingredients here. No acorn flour, no traditional herbs. Reed considered this. What if we adapted the tradition, used what we have here to create something new but still meaningful? You would not mind non-traditional ceremony. Aiyana, everything about us is non-traditional. Might as well embrace it. Reed reached over to take her hand. What matters isn't following someone else's rules perfectly. What matters is the intention behind it. Aiyana squeezed his fingers. Then tomorrow after we go to town, I will prepare feast. Not traditional Apache meal, but meal made with love and commitment and hope for our future. I'll look forward to it. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the ranch. Stars emerged one by one in the vast Texas sky, and Reed found himself thinking about the strange path that had led them to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a bitter, lonely man counting the days until death would reunite him with his wife. Now he was planning a future with an Apache woman who'd taught him that healing was possible, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. The moon is rising, Aiyana observed, pointing toward the eastern horizon where a silver disk was climbing above the tree line. So it is. Still think it's a good time for new beginnings. Best time. Aiyana stood up, extending her hand to him. Come, I want to show you something. Reed let her lead him down from the porch and across the yard toward the small cemetery where Sarah was buried. He hadn't been back there since Aiyana's arrival, hadn't been able to face the guilt of falling in love again, so soon after losing the woman he'd thought was the only love of his life. Aiyana, I don't know if I'm ready. Trust me, she said simply. They stopped before Sarah's grave, marked by a simple wooden cross Reed had carved himself. In the moonlight, the letters of her name seemed to glow with their own inner light. I never thanked her, Aiyana said quietly. Thanked her for what? for raising man with heart big enough to love twice in one lifetime, for teaching you about loyalty and commitment and how to see best in people. Aiyana knelt beside the grave. Sarah Dawson, I promise to love your husband with same devotion you showed him. I promise to honor memory of your love by building new love that makes him smile again. Reed felt tears sting his eyes as Aiyana placed a wildflower on Sarah's grave, not as competition, but as tribute from one strong woman to another. I also promise, Aiyana continued, to raise our children, to know about you, to understand that they have two mothers watching over them, one who waits in spirit world and one who fights beside their father in this world. Reed knelt beside her, placing his own hand on the grave marker. Sarah, I hope you understand. I hope you know that loving Aiyana doesn't mean I love you any less. The wind picked up rustling through the cottonwood leaves with a sound like gentle laughter. Reed chose to take it as approval. She knows, Aiyana said softly. Love like yours, it does not end with death. It just grows bigger, makes room for more people to be blessed by it. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time since Sarah's funeral, Reed felt truly at peace with the past. He would always love his first wife, would always be grateful for the happiness she'd brought to his life. But he was no longer a prisoner of that love. Instead, it had become the foundation for something new and equally precious. That night they sat by the fireplace talking about their dreams and plans until the logs burned down to glowing embers. Reed found himself marveling at Aiyana's intelligence, her quick wit, the way she could make him laugh, even when discussing serious topics. I've been thinking about names, she said suddenly. Names for our children, something that honors both our cultures. Reed smiled. All right, what did you have in mind? For a boy, maybe Joseph. It is white name, but it sounds a little like Yosef, which means he will add in Apache, like he will add to our happiness. I like that. What about a girl? Sarah. Aiyana's voice was soft but certain. To honor woman who made you into man I fell in love with. Reed felt his breath catch. Aiyana, you don't have to. I want to. She was part of making you who you are, so she should be part of our future too. Aiyana moved closer to him on the settee. Besides, Sarah is beautiful name for strong woman. Our daughter would be honored to carry it. Reed pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by her generosity of spirit. I love you, he said against her hair. God help me, I love you so much it scares me. Good, Aiyana replied, tilting her face up to look at him. Love should be little bit scary, means it matters enough to be worth protecting. They made love for the first time that night with infinite tenderness and a patience born of mutual respect. It was nothing like the desperate passion Reed had shared with Sarah in their youth, but something deeper and more intentional. Two wounded people choosing to trust each other with their broken pieces, choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of their separate griefs. Afterward, they lay entwined in Reed's bed, Aiyana's head on his chest as he stroked her hair. No regrets, he asked softly. Only that we waited so long, she replied, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. But maybe we needed that time to be sure of what we were choosing. Maybe we did. Reed closed his eyes, listening to the familiar night sounds of his ranch, the wind in the eaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft breathing of the woman in his arms. For the first time in 3 years, the sounds didn't make him feel lonely. They made him feel grateful. The next morning dawned bright and clear, full of promise and possibility. Reed woke to find Aiyana already up, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She was wearing one of Sarah's old dresses, altered to fit her smaller frame, and the sight no longer caused him pain. Instead, it felt like a blessing, past and present, joining together to create something new and beautiful. Ready for our trip to town? She asked, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before him. As ready as I'll ever be. Reed studied her face, noting the calm determination in her expression. You sure you're prepared for how people might react? Small-town folks can be particular about who they accept. Let them stare, Aiyana said firmly. I am free woman choosing my own path. If they do not like it, that is their weakness, not mine. Reed smiled, pride swelling in his chest. Remind me never to underestimate you. Good advice. They rode to Millerville together, Aiyana seated behind Reed on his horse with her arms around his waist. The physical closeness felt natural, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years instead of hours. Sheriff Hawkins proved surprisingly receptive to their story about Carson and the slavers. A practical man in his 50s, he was more concerned with protecting the people in his territory than with social conventions. Slavers, eh? Hawkins leaned back in his chair, studying the report Reed had written. Been hearing rumors about that kind of activity down south. Glad someone finally put a stop to it. There might be 3 more of them at a camp near Devil's Canyon, Reed said. Figured you'd want to know. I'll send a telegram to the territorial marshal. See if he wants to organize a raid. Hawkins glanced at Aiyana, who sat quietly beside Reed. Ma'am, you have my condolences for the loss of your sister, and my respect for the courage you showed in fighting back. Aiyana inclined her head gracefully. Thank you, Sheriff. Justice has been served. Indeed it has. Hawkins turned back to Reed. You planning to make an honest woman of her? Reed felt Aiyana stiffen beside him, but her voice remained calm. I am already honest woman, Sheriff. The question is whether Reed is planning to make honest man of himself. Hawkins blinked, then burst into laughter. I like her, Dawson. She's got spirit. That she does, Reed agreed, reaching over to squeeze Aiyana's hand. And yes, we're planning to get married, soon as we can arrange it. Well, congratulations, both of you. Hawkins stood up, extending his hand first to Reed, then to Aiyana. You'll need to see Reverend Patterson about the ceremony. Fair warning, though, he's a bit old-fashioned in his thinking. Reverend Patterson proved to be exactly as advertised, a stern, elderly man with definite opinions about proper Christian behavior. He listened to their request with growing disapproval, his lips pursing tighter with each word. Mr. Dawson, he said finally, surely you understand the irregularities in what you're proposing, a white man marrying an Apache woman. The social implications alone. The only implications that matter to me, Reed interrupted, are that I love her and want to spend my life with her. But the children, think of the children such a union might produce. Where would they fit in civilized society? They'd fit wherever we raised them to fit, Aiyana said firmly, and they would be stronger for having roots in 2 cultures instead of 1. Reverend Patterson looked scandalized. My dear woman, surely you understand. I understand that you are supposed to be man of God, Aiyana said, rising to her feet with regal dignity. But I do not hear God's love in your words. I hear only small-minded prejudice. Reed stood beside her, pride and love swelling in his chest. Reverend, if you can't see past the color of our skin to the love we share, then you're not the man to marry us. They left the church hand in hand, Aiyana's head held high despite the stares they attracted on the street. Reed felt anger burning in his chest at the narrow-mindedness they'd encountered, but Aiyana seemed unperturbed. It does not matter, she said simply. We do not need his approval to make life together. Still, it would have been nice to have a proper ceremony. Then we will make our own proper ceremony, one that honors both our beliefs and our commitment to each other. They stopped at the general store for supplies, enduring more stares and whispered comments. The shopkeeper, a nervous man named Henderson, served them politely, but clearly wanted them gone as quickly as possible. Some flour, coffee, and sugar, Reed said, placing his order. Also need some fabric, something nice for a wedding dress. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. Wedding dress? That's right, the lady and I are getting married. I see. Henderson glanced around nervously as if expecting angry customers to materialize. I suppose we have some suitable fabric in the back. He returned with a bolt of cream-colored silk that made Aiyana's eyes light up. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth material. "Sarah always said silk was the most elegant fabric," Reed said, making his decision. "We'll take enough for a dress." As Henderson measured and cut the fabric, his curiosity finally overcame his discomfort. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you two, that is, how did this come about?" Reed and Aiyana exchanged glances, and she nodded encouragingly. "She showed up at my ranch half dead from a beating," Reed said simply. "I helped her heal, and she helped me remember how to live again. Sometimes it's just that simple." Henderson wrapped the fabric carefully, his expression thoughtful. "My wife always said that love finds a way regardless of circumstances." He handed Aiyana the package. "I hope you'll be very happy together." It was a small gesture, but it meant more than the man probably realized. Reed paid for their purchases, leaving a generous tip that made Henderson smile. "Thank you," Aiyana said softly as they left the store, "for standing up for us in there." "You don't need to thank me for that. We're partners now. Partners stand together." The ride home was peaceful, both of them lost in thought about the day's events. Reed found himself thinking about the challenges they'd face, the prejudice, the whispered comments, the way some people would always see their marriage as an aberration. But he also thought about the respect in Sheriff Hawkins' eyes, the grudging approval of the store clerk, the possibility that not everyone would judge them harshly. That evening, Aiyana prepared the feast she'd promised using ingredients they'd bought in town, combined with wild herbs she'd gathered from the ranch. It wasn't traditional Apache cuisine, but it was made with love and intention, and that was what mattered. They ate by candlelight, talking softly about their hopes and dreams, making plans that stretched far into the future. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the stars, both of them aware that they stood at the threshold of something new and wonderful. "Tomorrow," Aiyana said, "we begin building life together officially." "Tomorrow," Reed agreed, pulling her closer, and every day after that. The future stretched before them like an uncharted territory, full of challenges and possibilities in equal measure. They would face prejudice and hardship, would struggle to build something lasting in a world that didn't always appreciate what they represented. But they would face it together, two people who'd found healing in each other's broken pieces, who'd learned that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. On the Lazy D Ranch, under the vast Texas sky, Reed Dawson and Aiyana had found something worth fighting for, not just survival, but hope, not just existence, but life. And in the end, that was everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Lazy D Ranch as Reed stood at the edge of his property watching a small dust cloud approach from the east. It had been 6 months since the gunfight with Carson's men, 6 months since he and Aiyana had pledged themselves to each other under the vast Texas sky. In that time, they'd transformed not just the ranch, but themselves. "Riders coming," Aiyana called from the porch, her voice carrying easily across the distance. She was hanging laundry on the line, her movements graceful despite the growing swell of her belly. Their first child would arrive with the spring, and Reed felt a flutter of protective anxiety every time he thought about it. "I see them," Reed replied, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle at his side. Old habits died hard, especially when you'd learned that strangers could bring death as easily as friendship. But as the riders drew closer, Reed recognized the lead horse and felt his tension ease. Sheriff Hawkins was approaching with 2 companions, one a man Reed didn't know, the other unmistakably Apache despite his white man's clothes. "Reed Dawson," Hawkins called out as they reined in near the house. "Good to see you looking prosperous." "Sheriff," Reed nodded, studying the other men. The stranger was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the soft hands of someone who worked with papers rather than tools. The Apache man was younger, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Aiyana approached from the house, moving carefully but with dignity. Reed noticed how the Apache man's eyes widened slightly when he saw her condition, then softened with something that might have been approval. "Ma'am," Hawkins touched his hat brim. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Sheriff. Would you gentlemen like some coffee? It's a long ride from town." "That's kind of you," the well-dressed stranger said, dismounting with the careful movements of someone unaccustomed to horseback travel. "I'm Henry Morrison, Territorial Representative. This is Joseph Running Bear, chief of the Mescalero band that camps near the Rio Grande." Reed felt Aiyana stiffen beside him. "Running Bear," she said softly in Apache, then switched to English. "I knew your father. He was good man." Joseph Running Bear studied her face intently. "Aiyana, daughter of Spotted Hawk, we thought you were dead. The survivors from your band said Carson's men took you and your sister." "They killed Kaya," Aiyana said simply. "I escaped, found new life here." Reed stepped closer to his wife, placing a protective hand on her lower back. "Is there something we can help you gentlemen with?" Morrison cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Dawson, we're here because of what you and your wife accomplished. Word of Carson's death has spread throughout the territory. The territorial governor is very interested in how you managed to end a threat that had been plaguing this region for months." "We defended ourselves," Reed said carefully. "Nothing more than that." "Perhaps," Morrison said, "but the results speak for themselves. Carson's remaining men have disbanded, and slaver activity along the border has dropped to almost nothing. You've done the territory a considerable service." Joseph Running Bear spoke up. "My people have also heard of what happened here. They speak of Apache woman who chose her own path, who fought beside white husband as equal partner." He looked directly at Aiyana. "This gives hope to young Apache women who think they must choose between old ways and new world." Aiyana lifted her chin proudly. "I choose both ways. Take best of Apache teachings, best of white teachings, make something new." "Wise approach," Running Bear agreed. "Which brings us to why we're here." Morrison pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, the territorial government would like to offer you a proposition. We're looking for people to serve as liaisons between Apache communities and white settlements, people who understand both cultures and can help prevent the kind of conflicts that lead to bloodshed." Reed and Aiyana exchanged glances. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "Nothing dramatic," Morrison assured them. "Occasional meetings when tensions arise, helping to negotiate disputes before they become violent. Your ranch would serve as neutral ground where both sides could feel safe to talk." "And in return," Reed asked. "Official territorial recognition of your marriage, for one thing," Morrison said, producing a document. "Legal protection for your children regardless of their mixed heritage. And compensation for your time and expenses, of course." Joseph Running Bear added, "My people would also benefit. Having Aiyana as voice in these discussions would mean Apache concerns are heard by someone who truly understands them." Reed looked at Aiyana, seeing the excitement building in her dark eyes. This was more than they dared hope for, not just acceptance of their unusual union, but recognition that it could serve a greater purpose. "We'd want to think about it," Reed said carefully. "This is a big decision." "Of course," Morrison said. "Take all the time you need. But I should mention that we're hoping to arrange a peace conference next month between several Apache bands and territorial representatives. Your participation could set the tone for years of cooperation instead of conflict." After the visitors left, Reed and Aiyana sat on their porch, discussing the offer. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the ranch around them hummed with the quiet productivity they'd built together. "What do you think?" Reed asked, watching Aiyana's face carefully. "I think maybe this is why spirits brought us together," she said slowly. "Not just for our own healing, but to help heal wounds between our peoples." "It could be dangerous," Some people on both sides won't want peace. Aiyana placed her hand on her swelling belly. Our child will grow up in a world shaped by decisions we make now. Better to take risks for peace than accept certainty of continued conflict. Reed nodded, understanding her logic. Their child would be living proof that Apache and white blood could blend successfully, but only if the world they created was one where such blending was accepted rather than feared. All right, he said finally, we'll do it, but we set the terms. This ranch remains our home first, everything else second. Agreed. 3 weeks later, the Lazy D Ranch buzzed with activity as representatives from both cultures prepared for the peace conference. Reed had spent days arranging accommodations, setting up meeting areas, ensuring that both Apache and white delegates would feel comfortable and safe. Aiyana had thrown herself into the preparations despite her advancing pregnancy, drawing on her knowledge of Apache customs to ensure proper protocols were followed. She'd also worked with the territorial representatives to educate them about Apache culture, helping prevent misunderstandings that could derail negotiations. The morning of the conference, Reed stood in his yard, watching delegates arrive. 3 Apache chiefs had come with small groups of warriors and advisors. The territorial delegation included Morrison Sheriff Hawkins and 2 other officials Reed didn't recognize. It was a small gathering, but the implications were enormous. Nervous, Aiyana asked, joining him despite his protests that she should be resting. Terrified, Reed admitted. What if this goes wrong? What if someone says the wrong thing and it all falls apart? Then we pick up pieces and try again, Aiyana said simply. But I think it will go better than you fear. Look. Reed followed her gaze to see Joseph Running Bear speaking quietly with Sheriff Hawkins, both men smiling at something one of them had said. Near the corral, a young Apache warrior was examining Reed's horses with obvious admiration, while Morrison asked questions about breeding and training. They're just people, Aiyana observed. People who want same things: safety for their families, prosperity for their communities, hope for their children's future. The formal negotiations took place in the barn, which Reed had cleared and arranged with benches facing each other across a central space. He and Aiyana sat at a small table to one side, available to clarify points or help resolve misunderstandings, but not dominating the discussions. Reed was amazed by his wife's skill as a translator and mediator. She didn't just convert words from one language to another, she translated concepts, helping each side understand not just what the other was saying, but why they were saying it. When an Apache chief expressed frustration with white settlers' fencing of traditional hunting grounds, Aiyana helped the territorial representatives understand that it wasn't just about land access, but about spiritual connection to ancestral places. Similarly, when Morrison explained the legal requirements for land ownership under territorial law, Aiyana helped the Apache delegates understand that whites weren't trying to steal their heritage, but operating within a completely different cultural framework. The key, she said during a break in negotiations, is finding ways for both systems to work together instead of fighting each other. The breakthrough came on the second day when discussion turned to the problem of young Apache men who felt caught between traditional ways and the changing world around them. Several had joined outlaw gangs not from evil intent, but from a sense that they had no legitimate place in either culture. What if we created training programs, Reed suggested, places where young Apache men could learn skills valuable in the white world, blacksmithing, carpentry, animal husbandry, while still maintaining connection to their tribal identity. Joseph Running Bear leaned forward with interest. You would do this, teach Apache boys these skills. Not just me, Reed said, looking at Aiyana. We would do this. My wife knows traditional Apache crafts that could be valuable in white markets. Basketry, beadwork, leather goods. Maybe we could create a trading post where both cultures benefit. Morrison made notes rapidly. The territorial government would support such an initiative. Peaceful economic cooperation benefits everyone. By the end of the third day, they had the framework for an agreement that surprised everyone with its scope. The Lazy D Ranch would serve as a neutral meeting ground for resolving disputes. Reed and Aiyana would establish a training center for young Apache men and women who wanted to learn skills for the changing world. Most importantly, both sides committed to regular communication to prevent small misunderstandings from becoming large conflicts. As the delegates prepared to leave, Joseph Running Bear approached Reed and Aiyana privately. "I want to thank you both," he said formally. "What you have accomplished here gives hope to my people that we can adapt to the new world without losing our souls." "Your people gave me life when I thought it was over," Aiyana replied. "If our work here helps even one Apache child find their place in the world, it will be small payment of very large debt." Running Bear studied her face. "You know, there are some among my people who say you have betrayed your heritage by marrying white man. And what do you say? I say that heritage is not about who you marry, but about how you carry the wisdom of your ancestors forward into new circumstances." Running Bear smiled. "Your children will be bridge between two worlds. That is great gift." After the delegates departed, Reed and Aiyana sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their transformed ranch. In 3 days, the Lazy D had become more than just their home. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. "Do you ever regret it?" Reed asked. "Choosing this life instead of returning to your people?" Aiyana was quiet for a moment, one hand resting on her belly, where their child moved restlessly. "I think about Kaya, sometimes wonder what she would say about the path I chose. But then I think about the young Apache women who visited yesterday, the way they asked questions about living in both worlds, and I know Kaya would be proud. She'd be proud of everything you've accomplished." "We've accomplished," Aiyana corrected. "None of this would have been possible if you had not seen past my Apache face to the person inside." Reed took her hand, marveling as always at the strength in her small fingers. "You saved my life too, you know. I was dying inside, just too stubborn to admit it. Maybe we saved each other." As if summoned by their conversation, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at an easy pace. Reed tensed automatically but relaxed when he recognized the horse and rider. "It's Jimmy," he said with surprise. "Jimmy Sullivan." The young man who rode up to their porch bore little resemblance to the frightened kid who'd crawled away from their ranch 6 months earlier. Jimmy Sullivan sat his horse with confidence, his clothes clean and well-maintained, his face bearing the healthy glow of honest work. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson," Jimmy said, dismounting and removing his hat respectfully. "I hope you don't mind me coming by." "Not at all," Reed said, though he remained alert. "You look well, Jimmy." "I am well, sir, thanks to what you taught me." Jimmy's voice was steady, mature. "I wanted to come back and thank you proper-like for giving me that second chance." "What have you been doing with yourself?" "Working for a freight company in San Antonio. Started as a driver's helper, but I've worked my way up to running my own route now." Jimmy's pride was evident. "Honest work, good pay, and I can look at myself in the mirror without shame." Aiyana studied the young man's face. "You learned important lesson." "Yes, ma'am. Learned that easy money always costs more than it's worth. And learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing if you're smart enough to learn from it." Jimmy reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I brought something for you folks. It's not much, but..." He handed the pouch to Reed. "There's $50 in there. I know it doesn't make up for the trouble I caused, but it's a start." Reed hefted the pouch, surprised by the weight. $50 was probably several months' wages for a freight driver. "Jimmy, you don't owe us anything." "Yes, sir, I do. You could have killed me that day and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you showed mercy and gave me a chance to be better than I was." Jimmy's voice was thick with emotion. "That's a debt I'll be paying forward for the rest of my life." Reed looked at Aiyana, seeing approval in her eyes. All right, we'll accept this, but only because it obviously means something to you to give it. It does, sir, more than you know. Jimmy stayed for dinner, regaling them with stories of his work and his family back in San Antonio. His mother and sister were doing well, he reported, thanks to the steady money he was sending home. He'd also started courting a girl whose father owned a small shop, and their relationship was serious enough that marriage might be in the future. She knows about my past, Jimmy said, when Aiyana asked about his sweetheart. Told her everything, including how close I came to becoming something terrible. She said she was glad I learned my lesson before it was too late. As Jimmy prepared to leave the next morning, he turned to Reed with a serious expression. Mr. Dawson, I heard about the peace conference you folks hosted. Word's getting around that you're doing important work here. Just trying to help people understand each other. Well, for what it's worth, you've got friends out there. People who remember what you did to Carson and his gang. People who respect what you're building here with Mrs. Dawson. Jimmy mounted his horse. If you ever need anything at all, you just send word to the San Antonio Freight Depot. Jimmy Sullivan will come running. After Jimmy rode away, Reed and Aiyana returned to their daily routine, but something had changed. The visit had shown them that their influence was spreading beyond the immediate boundaries of their ranch, that the choices they'd made were inspiring others to make better choices themselves. We're building something bigger than we realized, Reed observed as they worked together in the garden that afternoon. Seeds we plant today will grow in places we never see. Aiyana agreed, pausing to rest one hand on her back. The baby was due any day now, and she was feeling the full weight of pregnancy. You should be resting, Reed said, noting her discomfort. I should be living, she replied firmly. This child will be born into a world of action and purpose, not world where mother sits idle while life happens around her. Reed smiled, knowing better than to argue with his wife when she'd made up her mind. Besides, he'd learned to trust her instincts about what her body could handle. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, Aiyana suddenly gripped Reed's arm. It's time, she said simply. Reed felt his heart skip a beat. Time, are you sure? Very sure. Aiyana's voice was calm despite the pain he could see in her eyes. This child has decided to join our work in the world. The next 12 hours were the longest of Reed's life. He'd assisted with difficult calvings and helped birth foals, but watching his wife labor to bring their child into the world was an entirely different experience. Dr. Morrison had ridden out from town to assist, but Aiyana had also insisted on having an Apache midwife present, an elderly woman named White Dove, who'd traveled from Joseph Running Bear's band specifically for this birth. First child born of this union between peoples, White Dove explained as she prepared her traditional herbs and medicines. Very important that both spirits are honored in the birthing. Reed found himself caught between two medical traditions, each with its own wisdom and practices. Dr. Morrison focused on physical safety and sterile procedures, while White Dove concentrated on spiritual preparation and natural remedies. Somehow the two approaches complemented rather than conflicted with each other. When their son finally arrived with the dawn, Reed felt tears streaming down his face. The baby was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with alert intelligence. He's beautiful, Reed whispered, taking his son from White Dove's gentle hands. He carries strength of both peoples. The midwife observed with satisfaction. Will be great leader someday, I think. Aiyana, exhausted but radiant, smiled as Reed placed their son in her arms. Joseph, she said softly. Joseph Running Bear Dawson Bridge, between two worlds. Joseph, Reed repeated, feeling the name settle into his heart like a blessing. Dr. Morrison finished his examination and pronounced both mother and child healthy. Remarkable delivery, he told Reed privately. That Apache midwife knows things about childbirth that we're just beginning to understand in modern medicine. White Dove stayed for 3 days teaching Aiyana traditional Apache customs, for caring for newborns, while Dr. Morrison provided medical guidance. The blending of practices seemed to work perfectly, just as Reed and Aiyana had blended their own cultural traditions. Word of Joseph's birth spread quickly throughout the territory. They received visitors bearing gifts and congratulations from both Apache and white communities, each group eager to see this child, who represented hope for peaceful coexistence. But perhaps the most meaningful visit came from Sheriff Hawkins, who arrived with an unexpected companion, Reverend Patterson, the minister who'd refused to marry them months earlier. "Reverend Patterson has something he'd like to say," Hawkins announced after congratulating the new parents. The elderly minister looked uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, I owe you an apology. I let my prejudices blind me to the love you shared, and I refuse to perform a ceremony that would have honored God." Reed and Aiyana exchanged glances, surprised by this unexpected development. "What changed your mind?" Aiyana asked gently. "Your work," Patterson said simply. "The peace conference, the way you've brought people together, the hope you've created for a better future. I realized that love that produces such good fruit must be blessed by God regardless of the color of the skin that contains it." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "I've prepared a marriage certificate if you'll have it. It won't change anything legally. You're already recognized as married by the territory, but it would give me peace to know I've rectified my mistake." Reed looked at his wife, seeing the same mixture of forgiveness and amusement in her eyes that he felt. "What do you think?" "I think grace is meant to be shared," Aiyana said. "Yes, Reverend, we would be honored to have your blessing." The simple ceremony took place on their porch, with baby Joseph sleeping in his mother's arms. Patterson's words were heartfelt and meaningful, focusing on the love and commitment he'd failed to recognize months earlier. When it was over, Reed felt a sense of completion, as if the last piece of their unconventional love story had finally fallen into place. As the summer progressed, the Lazy D Ranch became increasingly busy with visitors, students, and people seeking mediation for various disputes. Reed and Aiyana had hired help to manage the increased workload, including several young Apache men who were learning ranching skills while teaching traditional crafts to interested whites. The trading post they'd established was thriving, with Aiyana's baskets and beadwork particularly popular among wealthy settlers who appreciated the quality and artistry of Apache craftsmanship. More importantly, the cultural exchange was creating understanding and respect between communities that had previously viewed each other with suspicion and fear. One evening in late summer, as Reed sat on the porch holding his son while Aiyana tended to correspondence from various territorial officials, she looked up from her writing with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't stumbled into your yard that day?" Reed considered the question seriously. "I'd probably still be sitting alone in this house, counting the days until I could join Sarah in whatever comes after. And you, if I had survived at all, I would probably be living quietly with some distant relatives trying to forget what Carson and his men did to me and Kaya." Aiyana set down her pen. "Instead, we are here building something that will outlast us both." Reed looked around at their ranch, bustling with activity, even in the evening hours. Young Apache women were learning to read and write in the kitchen, while their mothers worked on traditional crafts in the sitting room. Several teenage boys were practicing carpentry skills in the barn under the guidance of Reed's hired foreman. The bunkhouse housed a mix of Apache and white workers who'd learned to respect each other's skills and traditions. "Sarah used to say that God works in mysterious ways," Reed observed. "I think she would have loved seeing what we've built here, and Kaya would have been proud to know her death led to something good instead of just more hatred and violence." Joseph stirred in Reed's arms, making the soft sounds of a contented baby. Reed looked down at his son's face, seeing features that blended the best of both parents' heritage. This child would grow up in a world where his mixed blood was a source of strength rather than shame, where he could draw from both cultures to become something entirely new. "He'll never know how hard we fought to make this possible," Reed said softly. "Good," Aiyana replied firmly. "Children should take peace for granted. That is how you know you have succeeded as parents." As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Reed Dawson held his son and contemplated the strange path that had led them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a broken man waiting to die. Now he was part of something larger than himself, something that would continue growing long after he was gone. The Lazy D Ranch had become more than a home. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear, cooperation over conflict, hope over despair. And at the center of it all was the unlikely love story of a grieving rancher and a wounded Apache woman who'd found healing in each other's broken pieces. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the wild sound echoing across the landscape like a promise. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But Reed and Aiyana would face it together, building something beautiful from the ashes of their separate griefs, proving that love could indeed bloom even in the hardest soil. Their story was far from over, but the foundation they'd laid was strong enough to support whatever came next. And that, Reed thought as he kissed his sleeping son's forehead, was everything.